2 weeks ago, I met Yahweh. He spoke to me. I looked at his face. And if you know your Old Testament, you know Yahweh means God, the great I am. You're not supposed to be able to look at him and live. Well, I did, and I'm here to talk about it, because Yahweh lives in Haiti. He has a wonderful, huge smile. He's the gardener at the guest house where our Building Goodness Foundation volunteers stay when they go to the area of Leogane. I was down there last week checking out housing after Hurricane Matthew. This is a typical tikai, a small house that Building Goodness Foundation has built. 700 of them. I'm very, very pleased to say that our ruse did well. Our houses survived. Not so much the neighbors. These are temporary shelters that still people are living in 6 years after the earthquake in 2010. Some of my friends who are not religious use the word about an earthquake and a hurricane as apocalyptic. I'm not afraid of theological language. I come from a large southern family. We get together twice a year, sometimes more, enjoy perfect, wonderful pork barbecue, a side bowl of theological discussion, doctrinal strips on the side. Our conversation is all about stories and memories and trying to be 16, 18 years old again, and almost always about Grandma Madeline, Grandma Eplee, our matriarch. The story goes like this. An unlikely couple, Madeline, on her way to the mission field, very driven, smart, in seminary, very unusual for a Baptist young woman. She wanted to end up going to China. Then she met Kelly, a sailor, just back from the North Atlantic where he was on a very fast ship chasing German submarines. And he had a touch of tuberculosis. So they fell in love. And for love, she did not go to China. And for the Great Depression, it forced them back to their homeland, to his home in the mountains of North Carolina, close to Asheville. And the next story is that as she sat on the steps of that little shabby home, and the wagon that had brought their possessions slowly made its way back up the road, she sat down and she went to bawling. That's Appalachian for really big grief. And then she got up, which was her character, and she went to work. And she made that area her mission field. She got involved in the school. She was the backbone of the church. She was the heart of the community. She drove people to goodness. She raised a family, ended up nurses, teachers, PhDs, successful business people. She had a code. She had an ethic, I think, that went something like this. Because of her faith and her love, everyone knew she loved deeply. Number one, you treat your neighbor like yourself. Love your neighbor like yourself. Everybody's the same. Number two, you go to school and you never stop learning, and then you never, ever stop learning. And number three, you work really, really hard, especially at number one and number two. So for us, and for me specifically, she impacted me so directly that it projected me through the 1980s. The first few years I lived in West Africa. I worked with volunteers who were working in water development next to the desert. I learned French. Middle of the decade, worked with Haitian refugees, the crisis, when so many people were coming back to Haiti, from Haiti to Virginia, actually. And I learned Haitian Creole. And then my wife and I worked in Latin America, Central America, South America, with Habitat for Humanity. We learned Spanish. So when we were looking for a place to stay, I did what we do in our family, the guys. We marry intelligent women. We listen to them. She chose Charlottesville. So we ended up here in 1991. And I realized that I was in a town where I could thrive. Number one, love your neighbor as yourself. But your neighbors weren't just local, they were global. It was everybody. Number two, people around here never stop learning. And number three, I could work hard. I found a place in the nonprofit industry, and I have been a professional volunteer coordinator in every job I've had, helping empower the community. Fast forward a little bit, 2010, January 13th. I was having breakfast at Tip Top Restaurant, Jack Stoner. He was the chairman of the board for Building Goodness Foundation. I was the newly hired executive director. And the conversation went like almost every nonprofit conversation goes. How do we get more money? How do we get more volunteers? How do we raise awareness? You know, how do we get in the media? Everyone who's done it knows this. But for me, because it was Jack Stoner, I was completely stoked. I wanted to work with this guy. He's a personal hero. He had been to Haiti a number of years before, had a huge transformational experience, found that he could use his construction skills very well as a builder, came back and he created a vision and pulled people to him, his closest friends, and they decided they had a vision for an organization that would give local designers and builders a chance to use them and change the world. He was unhappy with his life. He was discontented with the huge gap between the haves and the have-nots. And he turned it on its ear and brought and inspired so many people to him and to friends who got friends and friends that were involved that it became a movement. And I watched it happen throughout those 20 years. And so that was January 13th. And he said, as we stepped out of Tip Top, he said, "Did you see the news last night?" And I said, "Well, no, I didn't." He said, "I hadn't mentioned it before, but Haiti had an earthquake." And I said, "That can't be true. An earthquake hadn't happened in 100 years. So I went back to the office, and there on the screen, I was horrified to see Port-au-Prince with a mile-high cloud of concrete dust from thousands of buildings that had imploded on top of each other. And there were images of people being dragged out of buildings and stories about the whole not the whole campus, but the campus roofs falling from the Port-au-Prince University, killing thousands of students at one time. And the palace was down, and government buildings were down. And then the news started calling our office because we had been to Haiti, and we became ground central for things about Haiti. And so we ended up getting on the TV and getting the radio and talking about this horrible thing. But I was touched mostly by the calls that I got from the volunteers. Someone called and said, "How's Renee?" Someone else called and said, "How's Clément?" Someone else called and said, "How's Jean-Philippe? Have you heard anything about him?" Someone else called and said, "How is that lady that lives under the church with those 6 kids next to the clinic that we built?" Then it struck me, Haiti was not a place where we go for one more tragic story. Haiti was a place where our neighbors lived. We knew their children. We'd played with them on construction sites. We'd helped them build their homes. We'd had whimsical memories of what it was like to be there in their villages. We worked with them, we employed them, we were side-by-side partners with them in helping their lives and dealing with a very tragic history. So we got busy. It was about neighbors in our community helping our neighbors in Haiti. Plan went out. Once the emergency response teams were cleared out, about a month later, we got busy and we built a trade school so that Haitians can help the next generation of Haitian buildings not implode in an earthquake. Schools in communities that were far from Port-au-Prince. This one's in Cap Haitian in the north. Beautiful school in Hench. Cooperative centers where people can process mango and coffee. Economic development centers. A women's health clinic, the only of its kind in the mountains within 50 miles. And 700 homes, helping people have homes after the earthquake and then after Hurricane Sandy. So we learned some things. Haiti is a place where people automatically think about 400 years of inhumane injustice and slavery, corruption, bad U.S. policies, rice subsidies that obliterated their rice economy. All these things are huge and should be discussed, but what we have learned in our time, I would like to say this. It's about being good neighbors, a methodology of neighborliness. Number one, size does matter. While the international community is trying to, and for good reason, find a way to build the plumbing to get resources to the ground, small organizations like ours can make a huge difference by going into communities and being involved on the grassroots level to work with, number two, good neighbors already in place. Organizations that have been there a long time, that don't want us to come in and fix them. They already know how to fix themselves. We partner with them. It's about a relationship. It's not about a transaction. And that can happen on the community level. And number three, I don't want to be seen as critical, but I've been going to Haiti for a long time. Seen thousands of volunteers get on the planes and go down to be a part of it for good reason. They want to help. People want to help. They need to learn about these things. However, how many work sites when you go on, or places where you go where Americans are doing a great job volunteering, and the Haitians are on this side and there's a 60% unemployment situation going on. The Americans often are doing the jobs that people can do. I'm not saying don't go. I'm just saying let's find more ways to employ people, because neighbors help other neighbors have the dignity of jobs. What we do now, we send small teams, work side by side with Haitians. We employ dozens and dozens of Haitians to give them the dignity of jobs so they can send their kids to school and so that they can pay for their medical bills. So we've learned a few things. And now I'm talking about Yahweh. I said, Yahweh, I went out to your village, Destra. We built that community center out there. I heard that the storm hit and it was well used, but no one will talk to me. They're a little traumatized by the situation. What happened? He said, I'll tell you what happened. He said, when the hurricane hit and the wind started blowing and the water rose out of the ocean and the river right next door flooded, the whole village water level picked up 1 or 2 feet. And when people who lived in those temporary shelters started getting flooded out, they headed for the community center. And so, for 2 days, the wind howled so loud we could not hear it. I said, Combien monte la? How many people were there? He said, oh, I don't know, ampil. I was like, no, don't tell me, how many families? 8, 10, pas connaître, 8 or 9. Really? So you're talking about 80 or 90, 100 people, grandpas, grandmas, kids, cousins, everything in that shelter. He said, yeah. We couldn't hear ourselves talk. We couldn't hear ourselves think. And the kids were crying. And I said, that must have been horrible. He said, oh, no. Libon. Complet. I said, what? It's good? It's good? He said, yeah. Kaido. Litekembe. The roof. It stayed on. And then he went back to his garden. Thank you, Yahweh.